Would anybody ever describe you as being friendly and helpful and encouraging and tuned in to the personal dimension? If that's the case, it could very well be that you would be called an empath. And actually, that's a very good thing to be called, at least in my opinion. In fact, we can pick up on the word empathy, which is a very non-narcissistic word. And the empathizer is somebody that's willing and able to get inside another person's mind and heart and understand the world from their perspective. That's what empaths do. And that's, like I say, that's a very positive trait until the narcissist shows up and begins thinking, now, what can I do with that person that's going to make me feel better and going to help my quality of life? And usually that's not a very good thing for them to be thinking that way. Keep in mind that the narcissists tend to be exploitive. They tend to be highly controlling. And so what I want to do in this video is I'd like to talk about what it means to be an empath, and I'm going to give you 8 checkpoints, and then to figure out how you can make sure that you are aware of the pluses and minuses of that kind of quality of life so that you can stay on the plus side, not the minus side. Now, before we get to that, I do want to make you aware of the fact that we have some books available to you, some resources. If you'll look below the video, you'll find that I have some links to a couple of books. One of them is my book. It's entitled When Pleasing You is Killing Me. And if you have any inclination toward the empath side, I really encourage you to get that book because frankly, that book is written directly to you. And then a second book is entitled Ugly Love, and it's written by a partner of mine, Laura Carranza, and she talks from the position of somebody who's been through some narcissistic circumstances and has lived to tell about it and has some very interesting experiences to tell you about. And I think you'll find both of those books to be quite helpful, particularly regarding this subject. And then, of course, we would encourage you to subscribe to our channel so as more videos come up, then you'll be notified. Now, what does it mean to be an empath? Let's go there first. And I have eight points that I want to just go over with you rather quickly here. And I want you to just kind of place a check next to each one of these to see if it relates to you. 8 indicators that you might be an empath. Now, the first one would certainly come as no surprise to anyone. The empath intuitively picks up on the inner feelings and perceptions of other people. The empaths are the kind of folks that when you say something to them, they hear behind the scenes. For example, if you say something like, I went to my mother's house and visited her for the weekend. And then the empath is remembering, oh yeah, you told me about that before, and she's been dealing with some real health issues. So how was that? And was it going okay? And they kind of get inside your world real quickly, and they want to know that personal dimension. That's a very positive thing that they do, and that's something they do on many different fronts, and they do it quite skillfully. Number 2, empaths tend to be very sensitive. Now, we can say that what I just mentioned about being able to read other people's moods, that would be part of their sensitivity, but there's a backside to that as well, and that is empaths tend to feel their own emotions, and they feel the emotions of others in a more powerful way. They're impacted very strongly by the feelings of other individuals. And so their emotions can be kind of at the very front. If somebody's hurting, they feel it. If they hurt, they feel it much more strongly. If somebody is angry, it really gets to them in a way where a thick-skinned person might just shrug it off. The empathy doesn't shrug that off. They have a very delicate, sensitive nature, and when they feel something, they tend to feel it more down the spectrum than the average Joe or Jane would. Number 3. Empaths have a true passion to be helpful. And it's one thing for someone to say, hey, can you help me out? And you say, yeah, sure. The empath, it's like they get their sense of meaning from that. They really enjoy finding out what other people's needs and desires are. And it's like, well, now that I know you better, then I know how to make your life go a little bit more positively because of my presence in your life. And so they like seeing themselves as being helpful. And they're the kind of folks that help out in the kitchen or with little kids, or if there's someone that just seems to be down on their luck, then they're more than happy to go in that direction. Very helpful. That's just a central part of their identity. A fourth ingredient, and I actually like this one maybe the most, I don't know, but empaths are deeply moved by beauty. Now, when I say beauty, that covers a wide array of things. Now, obviously, we can appreciate nature and the beauty of nature, and empaths can enjoy that thoroughly. They can just sit on the back patio and enjoy watching cardinals jump through trees, or taking nature hikes, things like that. They enjoy music or drama. They enjoy the arts, and so anything that has to do with the aesthetic side of life. Typically, you're going to find the empath over there either actively participating in that. Many of them tend to be very artistic, or if they're not artistic in their skill set, they still appreciate what that can produce and what they're able to enjoy. Number 5, empaths tend to be drawn towards spiritual themes. Now, you've probably heard the phrase spiritual but not religious, and I guess I'm kind of leaning in that direction with this. When I talk about having spiritual themes, what I mean is the empath likes to think through the question like, why are we here? Or what's the meaning of life? Or what's the nature of love? Or how can I understand what the big picture is as to what we're supposed to accomplish in our time on earth, and dedicate my life towards that being something? How can I make a difference in the world a better place? And so there's a very deep need for meaning and purpose that they like to anchor down in. It's not just something that they don't do things because that's just the thing you're supposed to do. They genuinely want to plug it into a rationale that guides them. Number 6, the empath tends to be very available to the underdog. There can be plenty of times when you'll wonder, well, where did that person go? When you find out that they're over there taking care of somebody that's in a wheelchair or a little child, and they're giving them some direction, or someone who may be very new to a situation, and there's a group, and then one person seems confused. The empath is going to be the one that goes and helps that person. Anyone that seems to indicate I'm struggling or I have needs, the empath says, good thing I'm here. I'm glad to be of assistance to you. Now, number 7, and this wouldn't be very shocking to you, empaths tend to be idealists. Perhaps one of their favorite phrases is, why can't we all just get along? They have many good ideas as to how life can be, and they like to focus on goodness and love and joy, and they just want you to be able to focus on that too, and that's great as long as you're able to cooperate with them, but sometimes that doesn't happen. And then number 8, and this is kind of an interesting angle because it kind of pulls back from all of the first 7, empaths do have a need to be alone. Sometimes they can invest so much of themselves and so much of their psychic and emotional energy into people and events and causes that they have to pull back and charge their batteries just with a slow day or an evening at home by themselves, or where they're not bothered and all of that. So many times they'll treasure their downtime. Now, you look at that list of 8 and it's like, it's pretty good. In fact, I like being around folks like that. But then here comes the rub. And that is when you are an empath, the one kind of personality type that you have to watch out for very carefully is the narcissist. Because keeping in mind what I said a little earlier, the narcissist is on the prowl. They tend to be folks that are looking for someone who is vulnerable to their bossy and controlling kinds of ways, and they just absolutely love finding people that they can pull in so that they can have dominance over them. And the empath, who is not terribly dominant or overwhelming, seems to be rather easy prey to the narcissist. And so let's look at some of the downside to the empath, and then we'll draw a couple of conclusions from that. And one of the downsides is like I say, they're vulnerable to very controlling individuals, and they tend to get caught up in that. Empaths have a hard time saying the word no. They're so into the agreeable side of life. They like being helpful. They like being known as a yes person, that when it comes time to say, no, I'm not going to do that, it's almost as though they can have a guilt because it's like, well, I don't want to hurt your feelings. Or I don't want to get you mad at me, or maybe nobody else is going to be around. And so standing up for themselves by saying, that's not going to work for me right now, or I can only do it for this period of time but no further, can be a bit difficult. And then it wouldn't be surprising for you to know my next point, and that is empaths can at times be susceptible to guilt, and in fact they can be motivated by guilt because they have such a strong sense that says, I know what's right. Keep in mind that idealism, and I know how things ought to be, that when they bump into some things that are not going to play out in an ideal way, they can feel guilty as if it's their responsibility to make the world go well. For example, let's suppose that there's just been a bad discussion at home or among friends, and you didn't have real good understanding or coordination that happens because of it. The empath can walk away thinking, well, it's all my fault. Well, maybe not. But the narcissist, knowing that the empath can be motivated by guilt, is more than willing to say, well, let me explain to you why you ought to feel guilty. And they can play up on that in a real big kind of way. And so the empath is going to have to understand the distinction between true guilt and false guilt. Sometimes you need to feel guilty if there's something terribly wrong, but sometimes just being different doesn't mean that there's a blameworthiness that's there, and the empaths have to come to terms with that. All of that said, another thing that's on the downside of being an empath is they can be susceptible to emotional fatigue. And that doesn't come as a real shock. Sometimes they just feel worn out, and it can actually lead to a bit of discouragement, or why doesn't anybody care about me, or I'm always giving to other people, why don't they give back? And so at times there can be some depression, or sometimes they can be prone to some anxiety. Did I do enough? Things like that. And then finally, there can be the empaths can be prone towards overemphasizing the ideals, to the extent that maybe they can get into a little bit into a bit of a bossy mindset. And that is, they have such a notion as to how things are supposed to be that they can kind of scold others or judge others because they're not doing what they ought to do. And sometimes they can get caught up in that kind of thing. Now, see, let's keep in mind that when you have this kind of tendency, you're going to have people in your world who are going to be thinking, what does this mean to me? And so if you have this natural inclination toward the emotional and the helpful and the dutiful side of life, narcissists can just jump and say, well, let me explain to you what your duty is. Your duty is to take care of me, or your duty is to listen to what I have to say, or your duty is to make me feel good, or your duty is to do my bidding. And you have to be super careful, because what the very best ingredients that you have in your personality can turn around and bite you in the backside. So let's keep in mind that empaths need to focus on one huge word, and we've used it in many of our other videos too, and that's that word, boundaries. Making certain that you know what you can do and what you cannot do, what is your responsibility to maintain and what is not your responsibility to maintain, knowing when you have limits and when you've reached the edge of your limits, and being able to say, I'm finished, I'm done. And then when someone comes along and tries to reel you into their agenda, you can actually say, I understand that's where you're coming from, but I'm at my finishing point. You can go on, but you can do it without me. So let's just underscore this. Kindness, helpfulness, servitude, friendliness. Who's going to argue with that? That's a very good way to live life, until those characteristics turn around and are used and misused by the narcissist to their advantage. And so ultimately, you're going to need to stay on your guard. And I say that regrettably, because you'd like to think that others would be able to reciprocate. Stay on your guard and understand, live in the way that's most healthy, but understanding that there are some prowlers out there who might want to take advantage of that. Don't let that happen.